But TMS is also being investigated in a number of other disorders, and I'll talk a bit about schizophrenia, but it's also being tested in autism, in a number of neurological disorders. Let's go one ahead. And we're particularly also trying to accelerate the response to treatment, and this will have effect across the board. At the moment, an average course of treatment is probably 4 or 5 weeks, but we're focused now. One of our approaches now is to say, well, what if we bring people in and we give them a much more rapid course of treatment? Can we get a rapid reduction in depression that lasts over time? Some of the people we're working with in the United States did this recently, where they showed in a small group of patients they could get a rapid reduction in depression with a very intense course of treatment over just a couple of days. This was treatment just over 2 days. And so we're about to embark on a similar sort of study ourselves. And we're also trying to find ways of being able to stimulate different brain areas. The standard TMS approach only allows us to stimulate on the surface of the brain. Fortunately, there are far cluier people from a technical perspective than I am out there, and they are developing ways such as this, which involves, it kind of looks a little bit scary, but it's basically, these are just a number of different TMS coils that are arranged in such a way that their effects kind of add up in a much deeper brain region. And this particular region is one that's actually involved in quite a number of the cognitive aspects that seem to be important in schizophrenia. And so this is a very small US-based company that's come up with this machine, and we're working very hard at the moment to try and persuade them to bring one of their machines to Melbourne. It's probably only the second or third machine that they've made. We think we're in a good chance of getting them to bring that to Melbourne so that we can try to do some of the studies with this sort of equipment. But we're interested in TMS and schizophrenia as well. We have to be a little bit more careful. People with schizophrenia, because of the medication they take, and also possibly due to the illness itself, do have a slightly increased risk of having fits, so we have to be a little bit more careful. But we don't seem to have got into any problems with using TMS so far. Go ahead. And we know we can increase and decrease brain activities, and that has relevance to the treatment of some of the symptoms of schizophrenia. So, for example, if we think about the front area of the brain, the ones that are involved in, that we target mainly in depression, those areas of the brain are involved in the negative symptoms, they're involved in some of the thinking symptoms and the mood symptoms that people with schizophrenia can experience. And there's another area of the brain sort of up behind your ear, which is involved in understanding speech. That seems to be relevant for hallucinations of hearing voices that we can potentially access as well. So I won't go into this in any detail, I'll just get you to skip through to this slide. But there's been a number of studies targeting this front area of the brain to try and increase brain activity here in the treatment of negative symptoms. So that's in the treatment of those symptoms of lacking drive and energy and motivation. This is very early. I'm not sure we've got a clear picture of whether this works or not, but it certainly seems to benefit some people. This is sort of the target at the front of the brain where we want to stimulate and to try to get this area of the brain more active. We've done one study in this group, which is similar to most of the groups around the world. There's been 3 or 4 studies in Europe and a couple in America. And generally speaking, we see some beneficial effects, but they're not dramatic. But having said that, it's still very early days. We're a bit like we were in the 1990s still in depression treatment. Most of the trials have only been very, very short. And these are really long-lasting symptoms. And so I think our treatment's going to have to be much longer and more intensive to make a real difference to these particular symptoms. Keep going. However, at this stage, a more promising approach has been in the treatment of auditory hallucinations, so voices. So about 80% of patients with schizophrenia at some point in their illness will experience hearing voices. These are usually fairly distressing. They're often voices talking to the person, telling them to do things, often being critical, commenting on what they're doing in a negative way. So they're very, very distressing. And there are a subgroup of patients who, when they go into treatment with standard medications, have most of their symptoms resolve, but these voices continue to distress them. And in the brain, what seems to be going on is there seems to be an overactivity of the area of the brain that's normally involved in listening to and processing speech. So if all of you now, if every one of you was in a brain scanner, except the people who've fallen asleep, the people who are awake and who are listening to my voice, the area of the brain, particularly on the left, but probably on both sides of your brain, sort of up behind your ears, would be lighting up. It would be active as your brain's kind of working out what I'm saying and putting it into context. And probably also involved in the memory of the things that you hear. In people with schizophrenia, this area of the brain, when they're not doing anything, if they're just lying in a scanner and they're hearing voices, seems to be active. It's almost as if they've had memories of bits of speech during their life that have been encoded in their brain, and those memories are being recalled in an out-of-control sort of way. They're being reactivated and sort of repeatedly presented to them, which is obviously very distressing. So, as I said to you before, one way we can use TMS is to decrease brain activity. In depression, we're mainly trying to increase brain activity. But if we target this area of the brain, our focus we would want to decrease this overactivity, to try to make these voices go away. And this is kind of the bit of the brain, it's kind of up around this here, and this is a schematic of where we put the TMS coil to do it. The particular type of TMS that we use is not like the woodpecker that people in depression get. It's just this little tapping. The machine just fires once per second, and we usually leave it on for 15 or 20 minutes, and the patient comes in every day over the course of a couple of weeks. And you can't see this well at all, so I won't talk to it. But suffice to say that there's been about 12 different studies of this around the world to date, and it seems to work. It certainly doesn't work in everybody, but in a small subgroup of patients, it can really make a dramatic difference. I'll tell you a brief story of a patient we recently treated to kind of illustrate this. This was a woman in her early 30s who had problems with hearing voices, and depression in particular were really the two things that she'd experienced. She had some sort of paranoid symptoms, but these responded really well to medication treatment. And she was initially referred to us by a private psychiatrist because of her troubling depression. So she came into hospital, we gave her a treatment for her depression at the front part of her brain, and we were lucky, her depression got better. After 4 weeks of treatment, she was feeling a lot better, she went home, but unfortunately, her depression came back quite quickly. And a psychiatrist sent her back to us and said the reason why her depression came back was because these voices were still there. And they were really bothering her, and she just couldn't cope with the voices, and could we try to do something about that? So we said, okay, let's give it a try. What we'll do is we'll treat you for depression. We'll give you the TMS at the front of the brain that we use for depression. But every day after we do that, we'll give you some TMS to this area of the brain and see if we can make a difference to her voices. And so we started that. After five treatments, her voices completely went away. I must admit, even I was kind of staggered by how dramatically they changed. Her depression hadn't changed at all. She still was miserable, suicidal, feeling terribly, terribly depressed, but her voices had gone away. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, it actually took about 2.5 to 3 weeks for her depression to start to improve. So they kind of weren't tied together. They were completely separate. But throughout the 4 weeks, the following 3 weeks, her voices stayed away completely. And by the end of the 4 weeks of treatment, her depression had improved. It hadn't completely gone away, but it was a lot better. But her voices had remained completely absent. Fortunately, at most recent follow-up, I spoke to a psychiatrist a couple of weeks ago. It was about 6 weeks after hospitalisation, and her voices had remained away, had remained going away. The one, no, you can't see on here, this is a graph meant to show kind of over time what happens. And basically, there is some recurrence of the voices over time, but they often stay away for 3, 6, 9 months. And if we bring somebody back in and retreat them, we seem to get a response again. So there seems to be a capacity to get that benefit again over time. We had one particularly a girl who came to us when she was only 16 years old. It was the youngest person we've treated who had schizophrenia develop in her early teens. It was a very, very sad situation. She'd been unwell since she was 12 years old, had tried every single medication in the book, and she was trying to get through VCE, trying to get through her exams. She had TMS, her voices went away, she got better, but it would keep coming back again. But we stuck at it, and we managed, just by treating her on the school holidays, actually help her get through her VCE. It would kind of last about a term, and by the end of the term, with the stress of her exams and things, her voices would be coming back. We'd bring her back in on the holidays and treat her, and fortunately we were able to kind of help her get through that time.